My name's Marissa, and if you'd asked anyone who knew me a year ago to describe me, you'd probably hear the same three words over and over: cautious, reliable, predictable. I liked routines. I liked planning ahead. I liked knowing where every dollar of my paycheck went and what time I'd need to leave the house to beat morning traffic. That predictability was how I had survived my 20s without collapsing under the weight of student loans, rent hikes, and the quiet panic that comes with being a single woman trying to climb the ladder in a corporate office that thrives on chaos. If life were a chessboard, I wasn't trying to be queen. I was fine being the rook, steady and useful, moving in straight lines while other people flung themselves around. And then there was Lena. We met when I was 12 and she was 13, when my parents moved into a beige two-story house in the cul-de-sac at the edge of town. Lena lived 3 doors down, and she was everything I wasn't. Loud, magnetic, effortlessly cool. The kind of girl who convinced you to sneak out past curfew or dye your hair with Kool-Aid just to see if it would work. She was the center of every circle she walked into, and she treated rules like speed bumps, things you only slowed down for if there was a cop watching. But she had this way of pulling you into her orbit, of making you feel like her favorite person in the world, even if she'd said the same thing to 5 others that week. And back then, I didn't mind. I was grateful. I was the quiet kid lugging library books around. She was the one who gave me my first real taste of belonging. Years passed. We drifted in and out of each other's lives the way childhood friends do. I went to college, studied accounting, got the kind of job most people would call boring but stable. Lena didn't bother with college. She floated through retail jobs, waitressing, bartending, always between opportunities. She'd vanish for months, chasing some guy in another state or couch hopping, then reappear like she'd never left. But no matter what, whenever she came back, I let her in. It's embarrassing to admit, but part of me always felt like I owed her. Without Lena, I might never have broken out of my shell. She taught me to drive when my parents couldn't be bothered, introduced me to my first boyfriend, even held my hand through the worst breakup of my life. And maybe that sense of debt never left me, even when I started noticing how one-sided things really were. Lena was charming, but she was also careless. Borrowed things had a way of disappearing when they were in her possession. Books, sweaters, even money. She'd forget to pay me back for drinks or groceries. If she wrecked something, like the time she spilled wine on my white couch, she'd laugh, shrug, and say, "Don't be so uptight, Riss, it's just a couch." And yet, when she smiled that mischievous grin, when she called me her ride or die, I forgave her. Over and over. A year before it all went to hell, Lena came back from one of her vanishing acts saying she'd finally found her calling as a freelance event promoter. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but she carried herself like someone who was just one step away from making it big. She had a new car, an older silver Nissan, but she treated it like a trophy, polishing it every weekend. She joked it was her baby, and I knew better than to roll my eyes. Because despite her bravado, Lena didn't actually trust many people. I was one of the few she did. Which is how, little by little, I found myself doing things I never would have done for anyone else. It started small. Lena forgot her purse once and used my debit card to grab groceries. Another time, she needed to verify her address for a job application and asked to use my mailing info. When her car battery died, I helped her set up a AAA account with my number attached since she didn't want to pay the extra fee. And then there was the favor that should have set off alarm bells but didn't. One afternoon, over takeout, she said she needed to borrow my driver's license, just for a few hours, to finalize some paperwork. "It's not shady, I promise," she said, her voice lilting in that playful way that always disarmed me. "They just need an ID on file, and I left mine in Jersey with my cousin." "Come on, Riss, you know I'd do it for you." I hesitated, but she was right about one thing: she would have done it for me. I handed it over. She returned it 2 days later, with a sheepish grin and a Starbucks gift card by way of apology. I told myself it was harmless. That was the thing about Lena: every boundary I drew, she found a way to step over. And every time, I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. At the same time, my life was finally starting to feel like it had direction. I had been promoted to senior associate at the accounting firm where I'd been grinding for years. My boss hinted I might be up for manager in another year. I had savings, real savings, not just rainy day scraps. Enough that I was planning to put down a deposit on a condo in the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My future. Which is probably why what happened cut so deep. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about control, about everything I had spent years building with careful, deliberate steps. The night before it all unraveled was completely ordinary. I came home late from work, microwaved leftovers, and fell asleep on the couch watching reruns of Parks and Rec. My phone buzzed a couple of times, notifications from the credit card app, but I ignored them, assuming it was the usual promotional nonsense. The next morning, groggy and half-late, I stopped at the coffee shop by the office. When I swiped my debit card, the barista frowned and said, "Sorry, it's declined." I laughed nervously, handed over my credit card instead, and chalked it up to some banking glitch. But when I got to the office and finally opened my emails, my stomach dropped. 6 separate alerts. Your recent purchase of $1,243.76 at Best Buy has been approved. Your application for a new store credit card has been accepted. Your current balance is nearing your credit limit. I blinked at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't make any of those purchases. I didn't apply for any new accounts. My first thought was that it was some kind of mistake. Maybe fraud. Maybe someone hacked my info online. But then my eyes landed on the timestamp of one of the charges, 11:17 p.m. At the Target 2 blocks from Lena's apartment. I've always thought of myself as someone who could handle stress. Tax season deadlines, last-minute audits, bosses breathing down my neck, I prided myself on being the calm one, the steady pair of hands. But nothing, not a single chaotic day in that office, prepared me for the panic that set in as I scrolled through my banking app that morning. The numbers didn't make sense. $1,243.76 at Best Buy. $689 at a boutique I'd never heard of. $357.40 in Uber charges, all from the same night. 2 new credit lines I didn't remember opening. My checking account, the one I kept so meticulously balanced, was suddenly negative. Negative. The overdraft protection had kicked in, but even that had been chewed through like tissue paper. I called the bank on my lunch break, hands trembling so badly I almost dropped my phone. After 20 minutes of transfers and hold music, a monotone customer service rep walked me through the dispute process. Which, apparently, meant filling out endless forms, faxing over copies of my ID, and waiting 6 to 8 weeks while they investigated. "Ma'am, if these are fraudulent charges, you won't be held responsible," she said flatly. "Won't be? My account is negative now. My rent is due next week. I'm sorry, ma'am. I understand this is frustrating, but there's a process." Her voice was like gravel in my ear, grinding down the last of my composure. That night, I sat cross-legged on my floor surrounded by paperwork, bank statements, copies of my ID, printouts of emails from fraud alerts. I felt like I was staring at someone else's life, someone reckless, impulsive, who blew money like water. Except it was my name at the top of every page. I tried to tell myself it was some stranger, some faceless hacker halfway across the world. That would have been easier to stomach. But then, while scrolling through the list of transactions again, I saw it, Target, 11:17 p.m. 2 blocks from Lena's apartment. My chest tightened. It couldn't be her. No. She was careless, sure, but this? Stealing identities, opening accounts in my name, maxing out my cards? That was more than careless. That was criminal. And yet, once the thought lodged itself in my brain, I couldn't shake it. The next morning, I got my answer. Scrolling through Instagram on the train to work, I saw Lena's latest story, a boomerang of shopping bags stacked in her living room, designer logos practically glowing. Caption: "Treat yourself nail polish #blessed #boss life." The bile rose in my throat so fast I had to close my eyes. I zoomed in on the photo. The boutique bag in the corner, the same one listed on my statement. My hands went cold. The final nail came 2 days later, when I ran into a girl from our old neighborhood, Sarah. She spotted me outside the office and called out with a smile. "Marissa. Hey, random question, was that you at Best Buy the other night? I could have sworn I saw you. You had a cart full of speakers or something." I forced a laugh, my voice catching in my throat. "Nope. Must have been someone else." Sarah tilted her head. "Weird. I mean, maybe it was your friend then? The one with the big curly hair? Lena, right?" She waved, but I wasn't sure. And just like that, the denial I'd been clinging to shattered. I drove to Lena's apartment that evening. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. I needed to see her face when I asked. She opened the door barefoot, wearing a silk robe, her curls piled on top of her head. The living room behind her was chaos, shopping bags scattered like confetti, a new flat screen still half wrapped in plastic, a stack of shoeboxes in the corner. "Riss. Hey, what's up?" She grinned, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Where'd you get the money for all this?" I asked. My voice was too sharp, almost trembling. Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I pulled a crumpled bank statement from my bag and thrust it at her. "Don't play dumb, Lena. Best Buy. That boutique downtown. Target. These are my accounts. My cards. In my name." For a second, her face flickered. A crack in the mask. Then she laughed, high-pitched and dismissive. "Oh my God, Marissa, are you serious right now? You think I stole from you? That's insane." I gestured toward the bags piled behind her. "You're telling me this is a coincidence? That Sarah saw you at Best Buy with a cart full of electronics the same night my card got maxed out?" Her eyes narrowed. "Sarah? You're listening to Sarah now. She always hated me. She'd say anything to stir the pot." "Lena." My voice broke. "You used my license. My information. You opened accounts in my name." She pressed her lips together, then sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. "Okay, fine. Maybe I used your card once or twice. But you always said you'd help me out. You're doing great, Riss. You have a good job, savings. I'm just trying to get back on my feet. By destroying mine?" I snapped. Her eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't be so dramatic. It's not like it's the end of the world. You'll get it sorted out with the bank. They always forgive fraud stuff. Relax. Relax." The word rang in my head like a gunshot. I left her apartment shaking, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall until I was in the privacy of my car. She'd stolen from me. Lied to me. And when I confronted her, she acted like I was the problem. By the time I got home, I had 3 new emails from creditors. One warning of delinquency on an account I hadn't even known existed. Another threatening to send collections after me. And the third, the one that broke me, was from my realtor. "Marissa, unfortunately with this sudden hit to your credit, the bank has withdrawn their pre-approval for your condo loan. I'm so sorry." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The condo. My future. Gone. The police report I'd filed earlier that day suddenly felt useless. A number in a system, waiting in a stack on some detective's desk. Maybe they'd call me in a month. Maybe never. Meanwhile, Lena was sipping lattes in her silk robe, surrounded by my debt. That night, lying awake in the dark, a thought took root in my mind. Poisonous, impossible to ignore. If the system wasn't going to fix this, I would. There's a peculiar kind of arithmetic that takes hold when your life gets stolen. You start adding up what matters, what can be replaced, and what, if taken away, would hurt someone the way you hurt. For weeks I'd been running on 2 fuels, bureaucratic frustration and a very human, very small, righteous anger. The bank had its forms. The police had their patience. The creditors had their calendars. All of them had the luxury of time. I did not. Legal channels promised a kind of slow, polite justice: file a report, wait for an investigation, refund possibilities, credit bureaus to update, more paperwork, more phone calls. I pictured myself months from now, finally cleared, holding a stack of documents that proved I'd been a victim. Meanwhile, my condo deposit would be gone, my credit ruined, and Lena would still be living the glossy life her shopping sprees suggested. New shoes, new screens, new reasons to smile for the camera. Public shaming was tempting. The thought of exposing her on social media, threaded posts, screenshots, people piling on, felt cathartic. There would be fury, humiliation, the kind of righteous storm that looks like justice at first glance. But I'd seen what that did to people. It didn't always fix anything. Sometimes it turned into a spectacle, a short-term feeding frenzy where the target disappears into a different kind of shadow. And besides, Lena was the sort who could twist narratives. She was practiced at being charming in public and dangerous in private. Call her out and she'd probably turn the table, paint herself as the wronged party, whisper about unfair targeting, manipulate sympathies until enough people blinked. So that left something darker: personal revenge. There's a moral list we carry around, a ledger of hurts and slights that accumulate until one day we start believing the only way to balance the books is to take matters into our own hands. What I wanted wasn't merely to punish Lena for what she'd done to me. I wanted to take from her what she prized most and make sure she felt a measure of the panic and precariousness she'd handed me. Not in some theatrical way, no public stunt that would be forgotten in a week, but in a way that would fundamentally alter how people saw her. I wanted consequences that would stick. I'm not going to pretend I didn't think about extremes. I wrestled with fantasies, exposing every little lie, engineering humiliations, ruining relationships. Those are the fever dream things anyone imagines when they're bleeding from betrayal. But something inside me recoiled at the idea of inflicting physical harm or anything that could hurt someone in a way that could never be repaired. I drew a line there, hard and sudden, because revenge that kills you as much as the other person is a pyre I wasn't willing to climb. Instead I circled around symbolism. Lena's car, the old silver Nissan, was more than transportation. She polished it, fussed over it, posted candid snapshots of it like one might post a lover. It was a prop in her persona. It was the thing she used to pull up to bars, to stroll into parties, to show she had status even when her bank account said otherwise. If you took that away in a way that said, bluntly, you cannot trust this person, then the community might do the rest. Reputation is fragile. Money, even more so when trust is broken. If her car were gone under circumstances that made people suspicious, her little social scaffolding might finally crumble. People would whisper. Employers would squint. Friends would distance themselves. That ripple effect felt like justice with teeth. I want to be clear about one thing: I did not research arson. I did not Google how to tamper with vehicles or how to destroy evidence. I refused to arm myself with techniques that could be passed from one curious mind to another. This story will not teach you how to commit a crime, not in practice and not in theory. What follows is about my headspace, the planning of a personal, symbolic retaliation, and the moral rut that grew while I imagined consequences, not the mechanics. Planning revenge felt like relearning a language, the same words and phrases reframed into a strategy. Instead of, "I'm furious," I began cataloging Lena's patterns, her routines, the times she left town for weekend gigs, the people she trusted, and the places she parked. I walked past her apartment building 3 nights in a row and timed the comings and goings. I took mental notes of where the security cameras were and where the street lights left shadows. I noticed her friend group, who she borrowed time from, who she boasted to, and who might cover for her if things got awkward. I made a list of the small vulnerabilities that come with being someone who thinks charm is a shield. At work I wore my normal like a uniform. Friends texted about brunch. My mother called. I answered each with the same measured voice I reserved for audits and client phone calls. But beneath that calm I catalogued insurance information. Nothing technical, only cold facts gleaned from things Lena carelessly shared. She'd bragged once about getting full coverage because a minor fender bender had nearly ruined her week. She'd told me the name of her insurance agent in a conversation about an expired registration, the kind of throwaway detail she offered to make a point about how responsible she'd become. None of that was a how-to. It was a map of consequences. If Lena's car vanished, who would she call? Who would believe her story? Insurance might kick in, or maybe it wouldn't. If the circumstances were suspicious, companies can be as unforgiving as friends. I thought about timing. If I wanted suspicion to stick, it had to happen when Lena's alibis could be shaky, during a stretch when she'd bragged publicly about big purchases, when friends saw her acting extravagantly, while her credit looked strong enough on the surface that the scandal would look like a fall from grace. A scandal is its own punishment. How many people would rally for a woman who'd been caught buying expensive things with someone else's money? If the world could be made to look at her and say, she took what wasn't hers, then the court of public opinion might finish the work the banks couldn't. I'm not proud of the mental gymnastics I performed to get there. I rationalized. I told myself Lena had stolen my life's small scaffolding, the quiet, careful things that let me sleep at night. I told myself she'd been living a lie and that all I wanted was to reveal the truth. I imagined a scene where friends who'd always admired her suddenly looked away, where the men who'd flirted with her now crossed the street, where her landlord considered terminating her lease because the police were asking questions. It was petty and it was profound, depending on what part of me you asked. As part of that reconnaissance, I waded into the social threads Lena floated on. I asked mutual friends innocuous questions: how was she doing, have you seen any big purchases, and gauged responses. Some people admired her audacity, a few rolled their eyes and hinted at worry. I listened more than I spoke, felt the shape of people's sympathies, and began to see where a nudge could become a shove. But I never set out to ruin everyone around her. The objective was precise: make Lena's life unlivable in the specific way she'd made mine impossible. I learned small things that mattered later, not because they told me how to cause harm, but because they told me where she kept her vulnerabilities. She always parked in the same lot behind the liquor store when she was coming home late from an event. She left her garage door unlocked sometimes when she rushed inside. She loved to brag about the freedom her car gave her. Being able to escape, to vanish, to be 2 steps away from the next flirtation or the next gig. The car was part of her performative independence. If the car stopped being reliable, if people started to suspect she had something to hide, the performance would unravel. There is a corrosive comfort in plotting. It gives a betrayed person a sense of agency when everything else feels like it's been stolen. I told myself I wouldn't cross certain lines. I wouldn't hurt anyone physically. I wouldn't endanger passers-by. I would be surgical, symbolic, proportional. But even that calculus is a slippery slope. The more you pretend to be measured, the easier it is to convince yourself that consequences you don't fully control will remain contained. I rehearsed scenarios in my head, watching Lena's face when the police came, imagining the way gossip crept from phone to phone, the quiet judgment at the grocery store when someone recognizes her name. They were cruel daydreams, and I fed them like a hunger. Each time I imagined her life showing cracks, the rage that had felt private and small swelled into something almost joyful. It scared me, how quickly empathy could be pushed aside by the desire to see justice done on my terms. I also told myself a kind of rational story: the banks and bureaus could return my money later, but they couldn't return the weeks of stress, the missed opportunity, the way my future had been put on indefinite hold. If Lena faced consequences now, when people were still watching, then maybe there would be a deterrent effect. Maybe she couldn't just rely on charm and public image forever. Maybe, finally, someone would teach her that stealing another person's life isn't victimless. One night, after a sleepless stretch of walking and watching from a distance, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote it down like an auditor balancing a sheet: motive, target, non-physical constraints. I did not write instructions. I did not sketch a blueprint. I made notes about her habits, about the sociology of shame, about how public perception can alter private realities. It felt both clinical and obscene, a ledger of emotion dressed up as strategy. The plan, if you can call it that, was born out of desperation and a very specific kind of cruelty. I would make her lose something she treated like a talisman, and I would do so in a way that put her squarely in a position where the only plausible narrative for neighbors and friends to accept was that she had overreached. I wanted the system to smell trouble around her, to prod and poke until people's faith in her financial honesty faltered. I wanted her to lose callers, to lose credit, to feel the same small panic and dizzying shame that had been looped around my life. Even as I set the pieces in motion, to watch, to learn, to wait, I felt the quietest, strangest part of my conscience whisper: you'll have to live with being the person who broke her life. It was a whisper I tried to smother with logic and fury, but it was there, a small metronome keeping time under the roar of my plans. So I learned routines. I made notes. I stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to gossip. I practiced alibis in case anyone asked where I'd been on certain nights. Not because I suspected immediate exposure, because plotting obliges you to imagine the world's worst response. If you're serious about making a mark, you also imagine being held accountable for it. It's a strange sort of humility, the knowledge that if you do something monstrous, you may have to face a monstrous life after. And yet, as the days slid into weeks, the ledger in my head grew heavier with each unpaid bill notice and each application denied email I opened. My condo deposit slipped further from reach. Lena's Instagram glowed with the rewards of other people's money. The quiet part of me that believed in long-term processes, a bank's investigation, a court's fairness, felt like a soft-tongued dream someone else told while I was awake. The world was moving too slow, and the only thing that steadied me was the knowledge that I could act now. I did not look for instructions. I did not poke into manuals or forums. I planned only in human terms: timing, reputation, optics. The rest, the messy, dangerous part, remained a space I didn't want to narrate, even to myself. I was a woman with a wound who wanted the wound to be acknowledged in a language everyone around her would understand. That's where things stood when I decided to make a move. A long breath, a selfish determination, and the sense that I had finally chosen a fight that, in the quietest corner of my mind, I believed I deserved. There's a point in every plan where the idea separates from the person who imagined it. For weeks the scheme had been a paper thing, lists, timings, fantasies that lived safely on a page. But on the night I crossed the line, all the safety evaporated. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic. It was two hands doing something they'd only ever imagined, and the sound of my own breathing loud enough to drown out common sense. I had told myself I would be careful. I had drawn rules in the dirt: do not involve others, do not physically harm anyone, do not leave anything that could be traced back to me. Those rules felt like armor until I was standing outside the parking lot behind the liquor store where Lena always left her Nissan, phone in my pocket, heart beating like a fist against my ribs. The lot was empty except for a few late-night stragglers and a streetlight that hummed like an old refrigerator. I had driven to the neighborhood earlier in the evening and parked 3 blocks away to walk in. You do weird things when your life is already broken. You rehearse your breathing, count street signs, and imagine yourself as someone else. I told myself this was necessary, a surgical strike to remove a symptom of theft, but the truth sat on my shoulders like a wet coat. This was personal. It would be for a long time. I remembered the first time I'd really seen her with that car, weeks ago after she returned from one of her runs to the city. She'd washed it with the kind of exaggerated care that felt like a performance, elbows out, humming, the sun catching in the metallic paint. She called it her baby. She bragged about how free it made her feel. It was an extension of her persona. If you took it away, you took away more than metal and rubber. You took the stage she used to perform herself into other people's imaginations. I moved like someone under anesthesia. Methodical because panic makes you clumsy. I checked my phone for the time, took a breath, and walked the perimeter of the lot to be sure there were no cameras trained on the spaces where Lena usually parked. I crept past a line of hedges and froze when a voice called out from the dark. "Maya? Is that you?" a woman asked, squinting. Someone else had come down for cigarettes, a neighbor perhaps. I thought for a second I'd be discovered, unmasked as a trespasser and a liar. My palms were slick. I almost turned back, the entire plan collapsing into an apology and the realization I couldn't take it through with my heart pounding like this. But the voice passed by, and I breathed again. The worst part wasn't being seen. The worst part was that every step felt irreversible. There was no going back to the person I'd been before this night. Whatever I did would rewrite the next months, maybe years, of my life and the lives of people around me. I kept telling myself, proportional, symbolic, non-lethal. But the only way to make this matter, to make people look at Lena and reevaluate her life, was to create an event that broke the spell of charm and made the word suspicion stick. I won't write about the mechanics. I won't describe the how, because that's not what this is. What I will say is that when I walked away from the lot hours later, the air tasted like gasoline and ash, even though there were no flames visible from the street. That image, a silhouette where a car used to be, or a charred husk under a tarp, was my intention and my nightmare both. After I left, I parked a block away and sat in my car with my hands folded in my lap, the engine still warm from the drive. My fingers trembled, the adrenaline uncoiled into nausea. My chest felt hollowed out as if the act had taken a piece of me and left an ache in its place. I kept repeating to myself the rules I'd set: non-violent, symbolic, proportionate. But the rules couldn't stop the weight of what I had done from pressing into my bones. Early the following morning the neighborhood was a hive. I watched from the privacy of my kitchen window as police lights painted the houses red and blue. People gathered and whispered on porches. Within 2 hours, a car that had been Lena's was no longer in the lot, replaced instead by caution tape and a crowd of curious neighbors. Someone had called in a report: a vehicle destroyed by fire, suspicious circumstances. The police had responded, neighbors had taken photographs, and the rumor mill began its work before the smoke had even cleared. It was then that the construct I'd built in my head, a tidy, moralistic punishment, began to crumble into messier things. Lena's name went through the neighborhood like a spark. People who had only ever known her as the life of the party were suddenly posting theories, piling suspicion atop suspicion. A woman from the next block, who folded towels at the laundromat with Lena on Saturday mornings, called me in the afternoon, frantic and breathless. "Did you hear? Lena's car, it's gone. Burned to hell. The fire investigators think it was started." Her voice was thin. "They said it might be arson." The word itself had a weight I hadn't expected. Arson. A crime. A witch hunt phrase in a town that liked its order. I felt something I didn't want to name, thrill, because I had done something that finally made people look at Lena and not automatically cheer her on. And then, immediately, terror. Because once you unleash harm into the world, it doesn't always respect your boundaries. The police came to Lena's door that afternoon. I watched through the blinds as she stepped onto her stoop, hair in a messy bun, lip quivering, a robe thrown carelessly around her. She talked in short, clipped sentences, eyes rimmed red with fear and anger. A fire investigator asked about the car's history, whether she'd noticed anything strange, if she had enemies. Her answers were flailing. One moment she was indignant, the next she seemed to shrink under the weight of questions she hadn't imagined being asked. "Why would anyone do this?" she wailed when she called me later that night. Her voice was raw and small in a way that caught under my ribs. For a second, something like remorse flickered through me. She sounded terrified in a way that belonged to someone who didn't expect consequences to come home and bite. But then, somewhere behind the vulnerable cadence of her words, I heard the practiced anger that had always been her shield. "They think I did it," she said, and there it was, denial wrapped in offense. "They said I filed something weird with my insurance a few months back. They think maybe I did this myself to get money. Can you believe that?" Her breath hitched. "They'd really think that about me." Lena's world cracked in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Without her car, her weekend gigs fell apart because they were often across town and she didn't have reliable transit. A promoter canceled a shift, citing liability concerns. A landlord called and hinted that being the subject of a police investigation made her lease questionable. People who had once been her friends posted sympathetic messages online one day and private messages of skepticism the next. She turned to social media like a life raft, posting videos of herself sobbing and claiming she had no idea who would hurt her. The public performance of victimhood was, in some ways, the only tool she had left. There were cutaways I couldn't ignore. In the middle of the social chaos, a friend, someone I'd met once at a party, texted me a photo of Lena, hands grimy and raw, scrubbing at her steering wheel in a video she'd uploaded. She looked smaller in that clip, shadows under her eyes, mascara smeared. The comment beneath read, "We stand with Lena. This is horrible." Other replies, prying and cold, asked pointed questions about why she had been spending so much lately and where she'd found the money. The investigators were methodical and unromantic. They took photographs. They checked VIN numbers. They asked neighbors if anyone had seen a suspicious vehicle or person late at night. They questioned Lena's recent social media posts and her insurance claim. They treated her like a puzzle, a person with motives and vulnerabilities that could be read into a crime. I watched them do their job and felt a coldness that surprised me. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because I was beginning to understand how easily systems we trust can bite. For days the neighborhood buzzed. People swapped theories in the grocery store line. A coworker at my office asked if I'd heard the news and lowered her voice as if bringing it up could make consequences rain down. Lena posted pleas and tearful videos. "If you know anything, please come forward," she begged in one clip, eyes swollen. "I'm terrified." She tried to be direct, "Please don't assume the worst. I love this car." She attached photographs of the receipts for repairs, documents that suggested she'd invested in the vehicle over time. But people are gossip animals. The rumor of lavish spending combined with the spectacle of a destroyed car made for a tidy story arc. The notion that she'd been living beyond her means because she was hiding something darker fit into what strangers wanted to believe. In a town that likes to categorize people, Lena began to be categorized as both victim and suspect. That double image was powerful, it drained the well of sympathy fast. Her personal life frayed. A couple of her small clients canceled contracts, nervous about liability and the backdrop of scandal. The gig she'd had lined up for the following weekend evaporated. The promoter didn't want that kind of buzz. She started sleeping on the couch at a friend's place because the landlord had told her he'd be watching her account closely. Her mother called and cried, asking if there was anything she could do. Her brother, who worked 2 towns over, sent a terse message, "Be careful. People talk." It wasn't just reputation she'd lost, it was the slow dismantling of a life she had cobbled together out of charm and hustle. I watched all this unfold like someone reading the morning news about a country I had only visited once. Part of me felt victorious. Finally, she was no longer untouchable. People who had once helped her cover for lapses now had a reason to reconsider. But the victory tasted metallic and empty. I had been the architect of her nightmare, and the knowledge settled on me like a second skin. There was no undoing this by wish or regret. There were near misses that kept me awake at night. Maya had almost caught me the week before, a shadow at the edge of the lot, the quick narrowing of eyes that see something amiss. The thrill of nearly being discovered and of slipping away without consequence was one of the ugliest rushes I'd ever known. It told me something about myself I didn't want to admit. I was capable of precise cruelty, of planning and executing harm, and in the moment it had felt like control. Control is a seductive drug. It makes you believe that your hands, elbow deep in other people's lives, are healing something. But control doesn't fix what's been broken. It only rearranges it. When the helicopters and news vans didn't show up and the legal machinery moved with its own slow gears, the neighborhood's attention drifted to the next scandal. Lena's life, however, did not simply reset. She had to rebuild in ways she hadn't planned for. She had to answer questions at her job interviews about the incident. She had to plead with contractors who were hesitant to book her. She had to be smaller in public to avoid suspicion. I told myself I had delivered justice. In quieter moments, the ones when the house was dark and the street silent, I felt something else, a small, persistent nausea and a loneliness that cut deeper than revenge ever promised to. I had become the kind of person who could break someone's life in order to fix her own. The knowledge sat with me, a heavy, private stone I knew I would carry for the rest of my life. And yet, as the police rounded up statements and neighbors shifted their alliances, I found myself watching Lena's social posts with the same morbid curiosity as the rest of the town. Would people forgive her if she seemed repentant? Would her charm reassert itself? Or had I finally done something that stripped her of the armor she'd always counted on? The answers blurred together as if seen through smoke. That night, I looked at my hands in the sink and wondered when the person who could imagine such acts had taken up residence inside me. The reflection seemed foreign, a woman with tired eyes and a mouth that had learned to close around secrets. I rinsed the suds away, but the sense of having crossed a threshold did not budge. The lot, the tape, the investigators, those images had already rewritten more than one life. The silence after the execution was louder than anything I had ever heard. For a few days, Lena's car was simply gone, and I carried myself like it was just another week. I went to work, showed up for errands, smiled at the cashier when I bought groceries, and responded to texts with the same casual LOLs and emojis I always used. But beneath that thin skin of normalcy, my chest was a cage of rattling bones. Because I knew what Lena didn't know yet, her prized possession, her cherry-red Honda Civic, the thing she flaunted like an accessory to her existence, was never coming back. And in its absence, so many dominoes would fall. It started with whispers in our friend group chat. Anyone seen Lena's car? She keeps posting about it being stolen. I heard she left it parked outside that dive bar on Main. Sketchy. She's acting sus though, like, who loses a car like that? I scrolled through those messages at midnight, lying in the dark, watching the blue glow of my phone illuminate the ceiling. I didn't respond, though a dozen biting replies bloomed in my head. Instead, I sent a neutral. Damn, that sucks. Hope she gets it back. Playing dumb was both easy and unbearable. Every word felt like it should leave a trace of smoke, a scent of gasoline, some mark of guilt that anyone with sense could detect. But nobody did. They saw only what they wanted: Lena, unlucky. Lena, reckless. Lena, once again in the center of attention, though this time as a victim instead of the star. By the third day, there were patrol cars parked outside Lena's apartment complex. I saw them once when I drove past, their lights painting the evening sky in rotating red and blue. My stomach plummeted like a dropped elevator. Even though I knew that nothing could tie the disappearance directly to me, my hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly I could hear my knuckles creak. Lena posted a video the same night. She sat on her couch, hair wild, voice shaky. My car was stolen, and apparently they found it torched outside city limits. The cops think it was arson. Like, why me? Who would even do that? I've been dealing with so much already, and this. I can't. She started crying midway through. Snot, smeared mascara, hiccups. Raw. I watched it 3 times. The first with cold satisfaction, the second with unease, the third with something I couldn't name. Pity, maybe. Or horror at myself for feeling even the smallest pang of it. The comments on her video weren't kind. Girl, what's the full story? Sounds like insurance fraud tbh. Not the victim act again. The internet didn't believe her. Neither, increasingly, did the people around us. I became 2 people. By day, the dependable one. At work, I triple-checked spreadsheets, laughed politely at jokes, offered to cover a shift for a coworker. My boss even complimented me, "You've been sharp lately." By night, the insomniac. I lay awake with phantom sirens in my ears, replaying every detail of the plan. Did I leave something behind? A camera angle I didn't anticipate? A witness I didn't notice? Every creak of the apartment felt like someone outside, every unexpected knock like police waiting to drag me away. I started carrying alibis in my head the way some people carry pocket knives. That night I was home watching Netflix. That night I was with friends. That night I was too sick to leave bed. I didn't know which one I'd need, but I kept them sharp and ready. And yet, amid all that gnawing fear, a darker thrill pulsed through me. When I overheard people muttering at the coffee shop. Poor Lena. Or maybe not so poor. Heard she's under investigation. My chest lit up like a match. The chaos I had planted was blooming, wild and uncontrollable, and I alone knew its roots. Lena, meanwhile, was unraveling. At first, she played the victim hard. Facebook posts about my stolen baby. Instagram stories begging for any info please. She even set up a GoFundMe, claiming she needed help replacing the car so she wouldn't lose her job. But when the donations trickled in slower than expected, when the comments shifted from sympathy to suspicion, she lashed out. Y'all think I'm lying? Really? Do you know what I've been through? Funny how my so-called friends are so quiet when I need them most. She tagged half the group in one furious rant, including me. I typed a bland reply, "Sorry you're going through this, Lena. Hope it gets resolved." It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even kindness. It was camouflage. Later, I heard she tried to hire a lawyer, but the consultation alone wiped what little savings she had. She sent out mass texts asking for money, favors, even rides. She showed up at my place at 2 a.m., one mutual friend confided. Crying, begging for help. It was uncomfortable. Her desperation made people distance themselves. The sympathy that should have buoyed her only sank her faster. Sometimes, late at night, I'd see her face in my dreams. Not Lena the thief, but Lena the childhood friend. The girl who once shared popsicles with me on the curb. The teenager who let me copy her math homework when I was too tired to finish mine. In those dreams, she wasn't furious or manipulative. She was confused. "Why'd you do it?" she'd ask, eyes wide like when we were kids. And I never had an answer that didn't sound cruel. I woke sweating, sheets twisted, throat dry. Because here's the truth, revenge doesn't erase what was taken from you. My credit was still wrecked. My future plans were still jeopardized. No stolen car or arson suspicion would give back the years Lena had siphoned away from me in interest payments and overdraft fees. And yet, the part of me that relished watching her stumble refused to let go. The investigation dragged on. Police canvassed the area, interviewed neighbors, pulled Lena into questioning multiple times. She started looking gaunt, twitchy, eyes darting everywhere like she was already guilty. I heard whispers she was on some insurance company's fraud watch list. Another rumor claimed her parents had cut her off financially after hearing about the arson. The collapse was total. Meanwhile, people started looking at me differently, not with suspicion, but with quiet admiration. "You've been a good friend to Lena through all this," one coworker said. "You're one of the only people not trashing her behind her back," another noted. If only they knew. One night, I walked past Lena's apartment complex. She was outside, hunched on the curb, chain-smoking. Her eyes were red, her hair greasy, her body language wilted. When she saw me, she stood abruptly. "You believe me, right?" Her voice cracked. "You know I wouldn't. I didn't. I didn't do this. You have to believe me." I opened my mouth. Lies sat on my tongue, sweet and poisonous. Of course, I said gently. Of course I believe you. Her shoulders sagged in relief. She took a shaky drag of her cigarette. And I walked away, my stomach twisting with guilt so sharp it felt like glass. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just punishing Lena. I was keeping her alive on my terms, feeding her just enough hope to watch her crumble slower. And part of me liked it. After the smoke cleared and the neighborhood had its fill of whispers, the real machine began to move, men and women in plain clothes who asked pointed questions and kept notebooks. They didn't gossip. They recorded. They measured. They brushed aside theatrical grief and asked the small, boring questions that make narratives stick or crumble. Detective Alvarez was the first to come around my office. He wore a tired suit and a face that looked like it had seen too many stories that began with, "I don't know how this happened." He asked where I'd been on the night the car was torched. He asked if I'd seen anyone suspicious around the lot. He asked if I had any grievances with Lena. I don't know anything, I said, and meant it. I meant it in the way victims mean it and in the way perpetrators mean it, the same brittle refusal wrapped in different motives. But the police do what police do, they collect inconsistencies. And little things, an offhand comment, a contradictory text, turn into lines detectives tug on to see what unravels. For Lena, the tugging started with insurance. A claims adjuster had flagged something in her paperwork, a recent advance request tied to the vehicle that looked irregular, an emailed question that read like a polite eyebrow. That was all it took for skeptics to salivate, someone with financial pressure, someone who'd been spending past their means, someone who might profit from a staged loss. The town had long been primed to believe that narrative. It fit too neatly into the pattern everyone wanted to see. Then came an eyewitness account. A man who drove his delivery truck past the liquor store lot the night of the fire swore he'd seen a person in a dark hoodie, carrying something bulky, near the cars around midnight. He couldn't be certain who the person was, night, distance, the interference of headlights, but his statement made it into the official report and into the local grapevine. People like juicy, unresolved details because they make better stories. That detail made the story look like a plot, not an accident. The pressure mounted. Lena's face online morphed from victim to suspect in some people's minds. She posted angry videos, then contrite ones, then pleas begging for help. Her reactions were raw and theatrically inconsistent. She'd rage, then curl into self-pity, then swing into righteous indignation if anyone implied responsibility. Her unpredictability made her seem less credible to the public, and credibility is everything when the court of public opinion is the first jury. Then Lena did something I hadn't expected. Cornered by the police and frayed by the looks her friends now gave her, she lashed out in a way that would change the atmosphere around me and force me into a corner I hadn't anticipated. At a neighborhood meeting, one of those awkward gatherings where HOA members sip bad coffee and everyone pretends they care about security cameras, Lena stood up and addressed the room. Her voice was small, but it carried. "Someone here knows more than they're saying," she said. "Someone who's always been so, I don't know, proper. Someone who stands on the right and speaks the right words. Maybe they're too busy pretending to be good to see their own fingerprints." Heads turned. My skin went cold. I had come because it felt strange not to be there, because it felt wrong to watch the town judge her without offering the face of a friend. Now she'd named me without naming me. The implication landed like a thrown stone. Accusations were a detonator. My phone blew up with messages, some supportive, some sharp. A neighbor I barely knew texted, "You're the only one who's been there for Lena, are you sure you're not hiding something?" Another friend called breathless, "I can't believe she said that. Are you okay?" The air around me felt charged, and the more I denied it, the more people tilted their heads and asked the same question with kinder faces, "Are you sure?" A part of me wanted to be dramatic, to stand up and announce the truth, to tell everyone how Lena had wrecked me. The catharsis would have been violent and pure, expose the thief and watch the thief get measured out in public shame. But that's not how it happens in real life. Confessions don't land clean when the confessor has also become the aggressor. If I told the truth, I would be the one standing at the center of two crimes, theft and the orchestration that followed it. There would be no vindication there, only legal consequence and moral obliteration. Detectives started showing up at my door more often. They asked about my relationship with Lena, about any recent disputes. They noted that I'd been one of the few who retained composure when other friends grew frantic. They asked about the night in question. I recited my alibi, alone at home, late on client work, a couple of delivery receipts that could be verified with timestamps. It should have been airtight. It was not. Not because the receipts were false, but because the nature of circumstantial evidence is to breed doubt. People want to pick a side, and when a person who's been good for years is accused, it makes gossip taste richer. And then a twist arrived that made my stomach drop. A traffic camera a few blocks over had a fragment of footage, grainy, washed out, but enough to show a silhouette moving through the liquor store lot around the time of the fire. The footage was unidentifiable in the way old film is, motion, shadow, nothing precise. Still, the detective's tone changed when he told me about it. "We're getting more footage," he said quietly. "We're running timestamps. If you were near there that night and you didn't tell us, now's the time." My chest slammed against my ribs. The world contracted to the size of my phone screen. I thought of the 3 blocks I'd walked, the hedges I'd checked, the way the streetlight had hummed. I thought of the man who nearly caught me and dismissed me as a neighbor. I felt the net tightening. Improvisation became survival. I had to turn suspicion into routine, suspicion into ordinary. If the footage could place a figure there, so could other footage place me elsewhere. I thought of the coffee shop I'd stopped at the night before the fire. I remembered the barista's bored face as she took my card. If cafeterias and shop cameras were the kind of thing investigators used, then maybe they could be allies, documenting my pattern, my presence in other places. I made calls. I scoured receipts. I texted friends to confirm I'd been with them for part of the night, even though I hadn't been. I bought an alibi the way you buy a ticket, a small fabrication for a larger protection. It felt obscene to lie, to stitch together evidence that made me look ordinary. I wrote emails to myself, sent messages to friends who would vouch for a late-night movie, and even asked my landlord if the security camera at the building had any footage of me coming in late. Each act was a tiny compromise of the ethic I used to brandish like armor. I'd wanted to be righteous, instead I was inventing a life that would keep me out of handcuffs. The town's opinion fractured. A small, vocal minority clung to Lena's victimhood and attacked anyone who spoke of her as suspect. Another group, ever hungry for simple narratives, said the arson proved she'd been living a lie. Friends split the difference, avoiding the topic like a pothole. On social media, comment threads became trenches. Some people took my side implicitly because I had been the friend who didn't pile on, others whispered that my cool-headedness was a cover for cleverness. Then came the moment that made policy and personal collide. Lena, desperate and angry, did something I didn't see coming. She accused me directly, on her Instagram, no less, with a post so raw it made the feed tilt. She didn't use my name. She didn't need to. The photograph was of me, from a mutual friend's party last summer, laughing with a drink in my hand. The caption read, in part, "People who pretend to be good are the most dangerous. Some of us learn to fake empathy to hide what we really are." The implication was clear. Within an hour, DMs and texts began to arrive. "Are you involved? Be careful. We saw Lena post something about you." Detective Alvarez knocked at my door the next morning with a notebook and a tired face. He asked about the photo. He asked why Lena would claim I was dangerous. He scribbled notes and said, "People say terrible things when they're under stress." The empathic shrug in his voice felt like a verdict. I could not let suspicion calcify into certainty. I had to make sure the grainy footage, the witness's memory, the timing, the things that could be aligned into a story that pointed at me, were muddied enough to keep the net from closing. I called the coffee shop, the bar across town, anyone who might have a clocked record of me. I asked friends to remember me being with them that night in a way that was not entirely true. I apologized for the dishonesty inside my head 1,000 times and then did it anyway. There's a strange moral inversion that happens when you hurt someone and then protect yourself. Every lie becomes another layer in a house you can't leave because the walls are built from falsehood. The person you wanted to punish becomes a tether. If she falls too far, the rope pulls you down with her. Days turned into a grotesque normal. Interviews continued. Lena's lawyer, who had appeared like a ghost at the height of her fury, sent a letter to the investigators pointing out the oddities in her insurance claim and asking them to look at all possible angles. Lena's public rants grew more erratic. One minute she was pleading with the town to believe her, the next she was lashing out, demanding answers. To the outside observer, she was collapsing under pressure. To me, she was a live wire that might spark and ignite a new trail of evidence back to me. Then, when I thought I had managed to build an unbreachable alibi, an unexpected leak came. A neighbor's doorbell camera. One of the ones that many in our cul-de-sac had installed after a rash of petty thefts, had recorded a silhouette near the lot the night of the fire. The feed, when played back, showed a figure moving under the same streetlight I'd checked. It was low-res, but it prompted the detective to say the thing I had been dreading: we're close to identifying someone on the footage. I felt the air leave me. If the neighbor's footage matched the traffic camera's timestamp, then the pool of plausible suspects narrowed. The detective asked about my absence, about whether anyone could vouch for me. I handed him the coffee shop receipt and the string of text messages I'd manufactured. He typed them into his tablet with a neutral expression and said nothing. When survival rests on improvisation, improvisation becomes a daily ritual. I called a friend who worked late and asked him to claim he'd seen me around the building at 11:30 p.m. He hesitated, then agreed with a murmur, "If it helps you, sure." He didn't ask why. Some people will bend for the people they've known forever, others will not. In that bend I found both solace and disgust. The investigators widened their net. They began to consider motives from every angle. Lena's spending, the claim oddities, the man with the delivery truck, these threads could be braided into different stories. The town's eyes shifted with every new rumor, like a stadium turning to watch another play. The very public nature of the investigation meant that people were making judgments without evidence, and law enforcement was left to sort through the noise. If I had one advantage, it was that for now the noise was enough to keep the police from focusing solely on me. But that advantage felt like a bluff in a poker game I was losing. Each new piece of footage, each suspicious witness, each frayed friendship tightened the pressure. The net that had begun as a whisper in my head, the one that had told me to take matters into my own hands, had become a living thing that might very well swallow me whole. My lies to protect myself had made me complicit in their own small corruption. I was no longer the neat, predictable person I'd always been. I was an actor in my own defense, threading alibis and fragile proofs together to keep a lie from being exposed. There's no heroism in this. There's only the fact of being human, frightened, crafty, and ashamed. And under all that, a thread of stubbornness that said, if I'm going down, I will go down with my made life intact. I would not be the only one dragged into the ruin of our story. The room smelled like cheap coffee and sweat and other people's moral certainty. It was the kind of municipal space designed to hold a dozen grievances and 3 times as much petty righteousness: folding chairs, a podium, a big clock that ticked like an indictment. We were there for a tenant hearing. Lena's landlord had called for an emergency meeting, arguing that the investigation into the car incident made her a liability. Tenants came to watch, a few showed up for gossip, some volunteers from the neighborhood watch had their clipboards. Lena sat at the front, wearing the same hoodie for 3 days, knuckles white where she gripped a paper cup. Her face was raw from crying. I had thought I could keep away from this kind of theater. I had told myself people would forget, that the rumor mill would move on, and that my life, fractured as it was, would stitch itself back together in private. But there I was, too, because part of me wanted to measure the damage I had done. I wanted to see whether the town would tear her down or hold her up. Mostly, I wanted to know whether I could still be the person who walks out of a room straight-faced after the people inside have been broken. The hearing began with formalities, names called out, a thin man in a blazer reciting the rules, and then residents took turns. People lined up to lecture Lena about the danger of drama, about the stain a police investigation leaves on an entire building. A woman 2 rows back clucked that she'd lost faith in anyone who kept questionable company. Another man said he'd seen Lena on those spending sprees, and raised his eyebrows for emphasis. The room hummed with triangulated justice. We decide, we judge, we move on. When it came my turn to speak, something in my chest unclenched. I told myself I would say the safe things, support the neighbor, ask for due process, remind everyone that accusations are not convictions. I stood behind the podium, my palms damp, and began to speak the phrases I'd rehearsed. I don't know all the facts, I hope the investigation clears up soon, we're a community, let's be fair. And then Lena looked up. Her eyes, red and hollow, met mine. There was a small sound from her mouth, no words, only the shape of someone pleading not to be hurt further. Something in me, something raw and ragged, snapped. Don't, she whispered. It was a tiny, helpless word, and in it I heard every childhood promise we'd ever made about sticking together. I heard the echo of the girl who'd taught me how to drive, the girl who'd shown up with ice cream when my heart was broken. The memory was a grenade. I stepped away from the script. My mouth moved faster than sense or plan. She didn't do it, I said, the breath leaving my body in a ragged exhale. She didn't torch her own car. I could hear people around me shift, an intake of breath in the way a room senses a surprise it once explained. No, I said again, and the next words tore out of me like someone pulling a loose tooth. I did it. I'm the one who made it disappear. A silence like a held-in gasp swallowed the room. Chairs scraped. Someone muttered. Lena's head snapped toward me as if I'd stabbed her. For a second my own voice sounded far away, like it was on tape, the admission, the details I didn't mean to give, the apology I thought would empty the poison out of me. I didn't offer procedural specifics, not because I was trying to protect myself but because, even in that moment, my shame wouldn't allow me to reduce what I'd done to a how-to. I said the truth as best I could without choreography, that I had been consumed by the theft of my life, that legal avenues were too slow and would cost me everything I'd worked for, and that I had made a choice to take something from Lena in a way I knew would make people look at her differently. I said I was sorry. Lena didn't speak for a long time. For once, she had no practiced armor. Her mouth trembled. Someone in the front row began to sob. The landlord, red-faced and indignant for entirely new reasons, stammered that he wanted charges pressed and that he would be cooperating fully with any law enforcement action. Phones and pockets buzzed with calls. A man near me swore under his breath and asked if I understood what I'd done. I did. I understood in a way that was larger and more oppressive than any single law could frame. Detective Alvarez arrived within an hour. He didn't burst in theatrically, he just walked up, eyes tired but precise. He had a notebook and a clipboard and 5 calm questions that sounded like a scalpel. "You're prepared to make a formal statement?" he asked. "Yes." My voice was flat. There was no heralding music for confession. There was only the small bureaucratic pivot of how to turn a human act into a paper trail. I said what I'd done. I admitted the theft had existed long before the car incident, that Lena had used my accounts, opened cards in my name, left me in financial ruin. I said I'd tried to work through legal channels and failed. I said I'd been enraged and felt desperate. I said the words that had become small anchors in my head at night. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I wanted people to see her clearly. I crossed a line. The room emptied in a cascade. People who'd once been my colleagues and neighbors stepped away. Lena's friends sat stunned, one put her face in her hands and sobbed into her sweater. A woman who had once texted me encouraging messages about saving for retirement looked at me with an expression that was neither hate nor pity but something closer to grief. There's a particular loneliness to seeing the exact moment your life's middle ground collapses. The legal machine that I had tried to skip now began to close in on me with the surety of an engine. Detective Alvarez read me my rights politely and then offered me a ride to the station. The drive there felt like a corridor between the world before my confession and the world after it, a world where the small lies I'd relied upon would be parsed and measured and used as evidence against me. At the precinct, officers asked me for my account of the night. I told them what I had done and why I had done it. The questioning was clinical, the recorder hummed like a distant bee. I was booked on multiple counts, identity theft charges already lodged in another file for Lena's earlier fraud allegations became part of a larger narrative. There were additional investigations into the arson, into whether any insurance claims had been manipulated, into any other misleading statements either of us might have made. The procedural details were not my focus. It was the human aftermath that clawed at me. Word spread faster than I could imagine. Where once I had been quietly admired for my reliability, now I was the headline of the neighborhood's rumor columns: neighbor admits to arson, motive, revenge. My employers called. They placed me on administrative leave. A colleague whom I'd once stayed late with returned my things in a paper bag with eyes that avoided mine. My mother wept on the phone and asked, over and over, why, as if the question alone might reconstitute my life. Lena, for her part, was a storm of responses. There was, at first, the raw, animal grief of someone who had had part of her life taken. Then came the fury. She demanded restitution, screamed that she'd been robbed both materially and of the trust we'd shared since childhood. She posted videos that were equal parts accusation and heartbreak. She called me names, some of them the names I deserved. She pressed charges as well, not just for identity fraud but for emotional damage, for the calculus of life ruined. Friends polarized. Some people, oddly, sided with me, those who had seen Lena's excesses up close and felt I had been pushed to a point where I'd snapped. Others recoiled. The cleaving of relations felt less like punishment and more like the collapse of an ecosystem. People who had once lent me sugar now crossed streets to avoid me. At my arraignment, the judge looked at me with that particular judicial pity that sits between disbelief and a sense of duty. Bail was set. Conditions were imposed: no contact with Lena, no unsupervised approach to the neighborhood in question, and mandatory involvement in counseling, terms that seemed both trivial and monumental. The law, which I had once thought too slow, moved with its own cadence now, and I had to follow. Months slid by in a kind of bruising blur. There were legal negotiations, plea offers, meetings with a public defender who counseled me with a warm but sober pragmatism. There were court dates where pages and pages of evidence were read aloud, where Lena testified and where I watched her body language, the way each word she spoke seemed to cost her. I watched the town watch us. The neighbor who had once brought over lemon cake for my birthday now refused to make eye contact at the grocery store. The tangible consequences were sharp. My career stalled, clients who I thought had respected my competence shied away. The condo deposit was gone, the bank had not reversed the earlier denials. Collections called. My credit, the foundation I had guarded so carefully, was a ruin that even time might not restore quickly. The intangible consequences were worse: the quiet that once lived under my life, the sense that someone could trust me with their secrets, was gone. And yet, sometimes in the middle of nights filled with the hollow, heavy loneliness of the process, a stubborn, ugly thought would arrive. Lena had cost me everything in a matter of months. She'd been reckless with my identity and my future. I had wanted to teach her a lesson. In the cold calculus of those nights, a part of me whispered, she learned it. But the whisper softened into a sob that sounded an awful lot like truth. At what price? The revenge that had felt like rectification was now a slow, grinding machine that devoured bits of both our lives. I had her on my conscience, but I did not have back my life. I could watch her rebuild, or watch her not rebuild, but it wouldn't change the debt of what I'd sown. The reckoning was not clean. There was no public exoneration that made the shards of my past whole. There were small, private restitutions, an agreement to repay some of the money, attempts at mediation at one point that ended with both of us exhausted and angrier. But there was no undoing. Lena moved towns after a brutal hearing where the landlord terminated her lease. She found work in a different city, under a new name even, and left our cul-de-sac like a comet, a streak that cut the night and left a hole. I served time in a way that didn't make a neat statistic: community service, probation, mandatory counseling. I paid fines that swallowed small changes I had planned for my life. The legal penalties were less awful than I'd imagined in their immediacy. It was the slow erosion, the way trust dissolves and doesn't return, that was the real sentence. Friends drifted away. My mother answered fewer of my calls. The accounting job that had been the backbone of my cautious life became a memory. The last thing I learned in the courtroom was how thin vindication feels when it's wrapped in so much ruin. When the judge asked me if I had anything to say before sentencing, words spilled out of me that were mostly apologies and a small, shameful explanation. I told the court that I had been hurt and that my hurt had metastasized into ugliness. I said I was sorry to Lena. I said I was sorry to the community. I said I knew apology didn't erase harm. Her face in the gallery was unreadable. She did not stand to shake my hand. No one applauded. There was no cinematic absolution. Only a small, private emptiness where something had once been. Either of us, I still couldn't tell. In the years that followed, I tried to build a life that could survive the label of the woman who did a bad thing. I moved jobs, tried therapy in fits and starts, and gave talks at community centers about identity theft. Ironic, perhaps, but also an act of penance and a way to use what I had done for something that might prevent others from being harmed. Lena, I heard through the thin veil of mutual acquaintances, started over far away. Some days I hoped she was okay. Other days I wanted to be struck by lightning. The central question, the one that had first driven me to act, never left me. Had revenge solved anything? It had answered in a way that was as cruel as the crime it replicated. Yes, it had made Lena's life unmoored for a time. Yes, it had unraveled parts of her world and forced her to confront consequences she'd dodged. But it had also hollowed me out. It had traded one kind of theft for another, one level of ruin for a different set of scars. I had not been restored. I had been remade. If there is a moral to this kind of story, it is not shapely. It doesn't fit neatly on a postcard. Revenge can feel like righting a wrong in the moment, but it often grows roots of its own. It becomes a thing with its own demand for sustenance. When you feed it, be prepared to find out what it eats. The last time I saw Lena in person was at a small, gray courthouse where we both had to sign papers to finalize some mediated settlement, technicalities and insurance mumbo-jumbo I only half understood. She arrived late, hair in a simple bun, face tighter than I remembered. We didn't speak more than a few necessary words. Our hands brushed for an instant as we both reached for the same pen. For a second, the world stuttered and I had that ridiculous, unbearable feeling of our childhood, two girls on a curb, sticky with popsicle juice, dreaming without malice. Then the moment was gone. She left the room and walked away. I watched her go. I wanted to call after her, to explain or to beg forgiveness, but the words were heavy and useless. Instead I signed the papers and left. The sun was thin, the streets ordinary. People walked dogs. Shops opened. Life carried on. Standing there, among the hum of mundane living, I understood the most terrible thing about revenge: it never rebuilds what it destroys. It only makes a new landscape where people must learn to live differently. It's been 3 years. Long enough for the wounds to scar over, not nearly long enough for them to fade. The official record says I paid my debt, probation served, fines paid, community service hours logged. I kept my head down, avoided further scandal, did the counseling sessions even when I wanted to scream at the bland phrases of accountability and growth. On paper, I am rehabilitated. But the truth doesn't fit on paper. I lost almost everything I thought defined me. My job in finance never came back, not really. No firm wants a liability, not when trust is their currency. I work now in a small logistics office, pushing forms and filing reports. It pays the bills, but nobody looks me in the eye the way clients used to. I live alone in a rented apartment where the neighbors don't know my history, and I intend to keep it that way. I measure my days in cups of coffee and the dull rhythm of a keyboard. My mother speaks to me less. When she does, it's strained, a brittle politeness that wasn't there before. Friends have evaporated into silence. Some stopped returning calls during the court hearings, others cut me off more cleanly, unwilling to have their names associated with mine. In their absence, I learned something ugly: people don't just punish you for your crimes, they punish you for reminding them how easy it is to break. And Lena? She vanished from my orbit entirely. After the hearings, after the press whispers, she left town. Last I heard, she'd moved across state lines, maybe even changed her name again. No social media, no public trace. Only rumors that she bartends at a place where nobody knows her past, where she can reinvent herself among strangers who don't ask questions. Sometimes I imagine running into her by chance, at a gas station, an airport, even a grocery store. I imagine her looking at me with those same raw eyes from the hearing, the ones that forced my confession. I wonder if she'd scream, or laugh, or simply walk past me without a flicker of recognition. The last option frightens me the most, that I am no longer significant enough even to hate. But once, just once, I did see her again. It was a year ago, outside a courthouse where I'd gone for a routine probation review. She was across the street, walking quickly, hair tied back, dressed simply. She looked thinner, older somehow, her face set in a way that said life had not been gentle since we parted. She glanced up, our eyes locked for a single second, and then she kept walking. No pause, no acknowledgement. Just the sound of her boots on concrete, fading into distance. That silence cut deeper than any curse she could have hurled. Now, at night, I replay everything. The stolen cards. The buried car. The hearing where my own mouth betrayed me. Sometimes I try to justify it: she started it, she ruined my life first, I just wanted balance. Other nights, the rationalizations dissolve and I am left only with the weight of what I did. I took her identity, twisted her world, and then made myself the architect of her downfall. And for what? My credit is still wrecked. My career is a shadow. My friendships are gone. Lena is gone. The revenge did not give me back my name, or my future, or the years she stole. It gave me only this, the knowledge that when someone breaks you, and you break them back, all you're left with is rubble. I think, sometimes, about writing her a letter. Not to ask forgiveness, I know I don't deserve it, but simply to tell her I carry the ghost of what I did, every day. But I never put pen to paper. Maybe I'm afraid she'd never read it. Maybe I'm afraid she would. People say time heals. I think time just teaches you how to carry the wound without screaming. Revenge was supposed to be a weapon. Instead, it hollowed me out. I carved justice into her life, but in doing so, I carved away my own reflection. And that is the real cost of revenge. You don't pay it all at once. You pay it in pieces of your soul, month after month, year after year, until one day you wake up and realize there's less of you left than you remember. I know that now. And knowing it doesn't set me free. It only keeps me awake.